Hello everyone, my name is Sean Nunnery. I am a student at NC State. I'm doing this video as part of an assignment for AEE 326. I wish we could have met with you all at the farm, but things happen and they work out the way they work out. So I'm glad to be here on video with you and explaining some diseases that occur in plants and animals that are common to the Wendell area in North Carolina. Um, so to start off with, this video consists of three parts. First, we'll begin with vegetables. We'll do like some basic stuff, all your squash, watermelon, cucumbers, stuff like that, lettuce. Then we'll go into sweet potatoes at the end of part one. And part two will consist of fruit, and it'll be basic fruit like apples, peaches, nectarines, plums. And then at the very end, we'll do a very basic disease analysis of common diseases in livestock. We'll do your chickens, pigs, goats, sheep. Um, so it'll be very basic, but I hope it will give you an understanding of some diseases in North Carolina and some ways you can prevent them and treat them if they occur at your farm. So to begin, we'll go over some common diseases in vegetables as part of part one. So we'll start off with cucurbits. So cucurbits are things like cucumber, watermelon, squash, cantaloupe, and pumpkin. They're all in the kind of the same family. Um, so we'll start out with a pretty common disease, cucurbit powdery mildew, and I have seen it in my farm personally. It causes white powdery fungal growth on leaves, stems, and the petioles. Um, it may be transmitted by wind. That's a pretty common way for it to get from plant to plant or farm to farm even. Um, and this being a fungus, fungicide is the most effective treatment method. Now, if you're running an organic farm, prevention is key with pretty much any of these diseases. Um, so this fungus thrives in humid areas with dense foliage. So you may want to space your plants farther apart if you have a problem with this. Um, you may want to avoid getting moisture on the plants during watering. So this could be avoid like top-down watering, and you'll get that this is a big theme throughout the whole lesson. You want to avoid top-down watering on most plants. Um, so the next disease we have for cucurbits is fusarium wilt of watermelon, and fusarium wilt of any of the cucurbits. But it is caused by a fungal infection. The infection starts inside the vascular tissue of the root and wilts the whole plant. So, plants get their water from the roots, so it makes sense that if the fungus attacks that area, it's just going to wilt and die. Um, so the fungus spreads by soil-borne spores, and some of the best management practices are involve planting disease-free plants or resistant varieties. Rotate crops, so don't plant year after year after year the same species or cultivar of vegetable. Um, so also use good sanitation practices, and this is another common theme that you'll see throughout the lesson. If you have some gloves and you pull up one plant or dig up one plant that has fusarium wilt, you go over to the next one, touch it, and the plant has like a cut on it or something, then that plant is going to die of fusarium wilt next probably. So another technique to avoid the disease is plant watermelons or whatever you have in raised beds. So this disease being a soil-borne disease, if you get soil from a garden supply store, it's sterile. So if you put that sterile soil in the raised beds and then you plant your plants, you're not going to have fusarium wilt that has come from another place or come from the soil. The only way that it will get there is if you take soil that you don't have and put it in the raised beds. or the soil that you have that has the disease and put it in the raised beds. So using sterile soil in a raised bed is a good prevention method. Um, and again, you can also use fungicides. The next disease that we're going to go over is gummy stem blight of cucurbits, and I have seen this disease as well. Um, Gummy stem blight, also known as black rot, when it's affecting the fruit. It's caused by a fungal pathogen. It affects all cucurbits. I mainly have seen it in watermelon. That's just because I grow a lot of watermelon, or I used to grow a lot of watermelon. Um, but anyway, it affects all parts of the plant with a rot-like fungus. This fungus prefers warm, humid environments, and the disease is transmitted through spores and contact. Um, it's transported through the wind by spores um, and through contact, so like touching the plant. Um, and the treatments are pretty much exactly the same as Fusarium wilt. Um, just get good sanitation practices, raised beds, and applying fungicide if necessary. All right, so the next vegetable that we're going to go over is lettuce. So, uh, common disease among lettuce is lettuce drop, and again, this is caused by a fungus. Um, However, this disease has a wide host range. It can be onion, garlic, cabbage, broccoli, pepper, potato, and cucurbits included. Um, but it really affects lettuce. It seems like, um, and one thing that's different from this fungal disease than the others is crop rotation doesn't do much to prevent it because it has such a wide host range. So, I mean, pretty much every vegetable crop can be a host. Um, there's only a few is that it won't take to being a host. So the lettuce drop affects the upper and lower leaves as well as the stems of the lettuce, and it spreads through airborne spores. So, um, some methods for preventing this disease is to apply fungicides and use use plants that are resistant. So, because rotate crops because crop rotation may not be effective. If you do find plants that will not be hosts of lettuce drop, you definitely use them and rotate with them. Um, and since fungus favors a moist environment, maybe irrigate from below the surface, like with the other fungal diseases. Alright, so our next vegetable is going to be pepper, potato, and tomato. So these are part of the nightshade family. Um, and you'll notice throughout this lesson that plants that are within the family of each other, that that diseases may flow from one plant to another. Um, so the first one that we'll go over in this group is the Boitrus gray mold of tomato, or just gray mold. It's a pretty common way to say it. So this is also caused by fungus, and the gray mold affects many vegetable crops. Pretty much all of the nightshade family, um, as well as beans and fruit. Um, so it affects all above ground plant parts, and it produces a velvety, grayish brown spore mass. So on affected tissue. So and when you disturb this, it releases a whole bunch of spores that just can go, since it's airborne, it can go anywhere and infect other plants. So, common ways for this to enter the plant is through leaf scars, cracks, and pruning wounds. Um, and the spores can remain dormant for up to 12 weeks. So, uh, this gray mold, even if you eradicated it, you still got to watch out for it for at least 12 weeks. Um, so it favors high humidity and cool temperatures. And by cool temperatures, we mean like 65 to 75 degrees. And the spores are transported through the wind and rain. So some common methods to prevent this or to treat it is apply fungicides and avoid overhead watering. So again, a common theme. And keep the temperature above 70 degrees if you have access to a greenhouse. Since the disease favors 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, if you keep it above 70, it's going to really tamper with that disease's ability to infect. Also, again, another common theme, practice good sanitation. Um, so the next disease that we're going to go over is Phyloptera blight of peppers. So this is again caused by it's caused by fungus as well, and it's got a wide host range of peppers, um, eggplant, tomato, and snap beans, and it also affects cucurbits. Um, so some of the symptoms include like rot-like. Um, it, the symptoms include like rot-like lesions and stuff like that on the plant, um, crown rot, and fruit rot. So this disease really loves wet conditions. Um, it tends to manifest itself as like a wilting plant. So uh, if the plant starts to wilt, most of the time it will eventually die. Um, as the disease progresses, lesions become like dark brown and extend upward to girdle the stem. So they cut off the nutrients for the plant, and this is what causes it to wilt. Um, so some pretty common methods to prevent this and treat it are plant resistant varieties, avoid overhead watering and excessive moisture, and practice good sanitation. And the next vegetable disease that we have is tomato late blight. So, I have seen this as well in my garden. It's pretty common if you don't use a resistant variety of tomato or any nightshade plant. Um, so tomato late blight is caused by um, a Meseite pathogen. So the pathogen is best known for causing the Irish potato famine. And for those of you who don't know, the Irish potato famine occurred in like the 1840s, and it killed a lot of people due to starvation because the potato was a primary food crop, and it took up a large part of the Irish people's diet back then. Um, so because potatoes are part of the nightshade family as well, so this rolls over to tomatoes and peppers. So it affects all above ground portions of the plant, but the disease usually is first recognized by the foliar symptoms. Some foliar foliage, so it affects the leaves usually to start with, um, and it causes like lesions and rots fruit. So this pathogen, it prefers cool, wet weather, um, clouds. If you have a few days or like maybe a week of like stormy kind of dreary looking weather, uh, it could cause this or uh, cause this infection to grow even more. Since the clouds will protect the disease from the sun, and the wet weather will again encourage growth of the disease. So the best way to prevent this and treat it is plant early in the season to prevent high disease pressure. So if you plant ahead of the time that everybody else is planting, your plants will overcome that stage where they're stressed out from being planted, and then they'll be up and they'll be strong when the disease starts to really get on them and try to infect them. Um, so also follow the same procedures as Phylloroptera blight of peppers. Pretty much the same. Practice good sanitation, avoid overhead watering and excessive moisture. And all right, so our next vegetable is the sweet potato. So sweet potatoes are a very common crop in North Carolina. I believe we're one of the top producing states of the sweet potato. Um, and there's a few diseases that are associated with this. Black rot of sweet potato is very common. It is caused by a fungus, and symptoms are usually seen at harvest because you might cut into them. And I mean, that's when you dig the plant up, um, and it affects the root. So um, the fungus causes a dark, firm, like dark colored rot that does not extend into the cortex of the sweet potato root, so it doesn't extend into the very center. Um, Infections typically begin at wounds, so if you hit it with like a plow or something like that, it could get in there and affect the plant. Um, so it's caused by infested soil, infested equipment, and some insects can actually transport the fungus. Um, Also, like bedding roots that are infected with the black rot, like putting the plants together and then planting them, it can also lead to pathogen transmission. And so the best ways to prevent these is uh, like rotate crops 3 to 4 years. So have a 3 to 4 year crop rotation. Plant sweet potatoes at one spot, and then plant something else. Then 3 to 4 years later, you're allowed to plant sweet potatoes there again. And also, one thing unique about this disease is morning glories can transmit it to sweet potatoes. So if you have an area that has a lot of morning glories, maybe pull those up, practice good sanitation measures, sterilize your gloves or whatever you use to dig them up, and then you're good to go. But or maybe find a different spot if morning glories like to grow in your garden. Um, Also, use disease-free plants. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you see some early stages, you may want to just replant the whole thing. And also practice good sanitation. And the next section that we have is southern blight of sweet potatoes. It's caused by a fungus as well. The symptoms may be like a soft rot at the base of the seed root, and it after that it causes death of the plant um, after sprouts have reached the soil line. So in mild infections, you can observe it if you pull the plant up, and you'll see the rot at the base of the plant. But as it gets worse, if you try to pull that plant up, it's just gonna pop off because it's rotted so bad, and it'll just eventually kill the plant. And so this fungus, it favors dense canopies because that traps moisture. It's shaded. It protects the fungus from the sun and high humidity and warm temperatures. So again, North Carolina is a very hot, humid state in the summer. So a lot of these fungus just thrive here. Um, and it's commonly transmitted through soil. So again, you're going to want to follow the same procedures as the other soil-borne or soil-transmitted funguses and diseases. Um, so ways you can prevent: choose less susceptible cultivars. I have some listed here. Um, Beauregard or Evangeline is a resistant cultivar of sweet potato. I also use certified pathogen-free roots, and I'm sure you can find those at that certification at any store you go to buy plants, any reputable store. Um, Also, select bedding sites that have not been planted with sweet potatoes for at least 3 years. So again, follow that crop rotation. Um, and also another recommendation is to deep plow your field. Since this is a soil transmitted fungus, you deep plow those fields, bury the spores. That's gonna you know put those spores out of reach of the plants, or put the plants out of reach of the spores. Um, so the disease does not survive when it's buried 8 inches or deeper in the soil. And avoid plant injury. So if you dent a plant or something, that may provide a pathway for that fungus to infect the plant. Also, another recommendation: along with the deep plow, is to expose the soil to sun for at least 6 weeks. So what will happen is the UV from the sun, it'll come down, hit the soil, and cook those fungus spores. Um, and also you can use fungicides. That's another um, common way to treat this. So we'll go right into fruit. So the fruit that we're going to talk about is apples, nectarines, plums, peaches. Those are some pretty common fruit that we have here. We'll also cover, there's one disease that affects apples and pears, and so we'll go over that as well. Um, so to start off with, we're going to start off with apples. Uh, apple scab. Apple scab is caused by a fungus. It infects leaves and fruit, and it causes like an olive green to brown spots on the leaves. Um, it's a very common disease. It's rare that it will hurt your plant. Well, it will hurt the plant, but it won't. It's very rare that it will lower productivity to where you'll actually notice it that much. Now it can have severe cases where it will definitely make a difference, but commonly it's just an appearance issue, which may be a problem for commercial growers or if you're growing it for a farmer's market. Um, so we also have fire blight. So fire blight, it's definitely easy to notice. The name comes from the fact that it makes the trees look like they've been scorched by a fire. Um, fire blight is a bacterial disease that can kill blossoms and shoots and cause dieback of branches from cankers. So it may be fatal to trees if left untreated, and trees with multiple infection shoots may appear to be scorched by fire. So that's where it gets the name from. Some ways to prevent this and treat it: uh, plant resistant varieties, and also prune infected branches. So the first shoot you notice that comes up that looks like it, cut that off, and it'll go a long way to helping you save that tree and your other trees. So next we're going to talk about is cedar apple rust, and that's common in North Carolina. I've seen it on the few apple trees that we have here at my farm, um, and that's mainly because we used to have a row of cedar trees about it was honestly less than 100 yards away from the apple trees. And what happens is the cedar trees, well, the fungal disease needs two types of host. It needs an apple tree or a crab apple tree. It needs a cedar or juniper tree. So it'll start out in the cedar or juniper tree, and then later on in the fungus's life cycle, it'll get on the apple or crab apple tree. So what we had in our farm was we had the cedar trees less than 100 yards away from the apple trees, and that was just like a perfect situation for the cedar or apple rust. It could jump back and forth every year. And since then, we have cut down the cedar trees and noticed a big difference. So I get it. And what happens is this disease causes bright and orange, red leaf spots on the leaves and sometimes the fruit. And it's usually a minor problem. Occasionally, it can cause some serious damage, but mainly it's a appearance issue. And like I said, if you're selling this to a farmer's market or growing it commercially, um, that could cause problems because people don't want to buy a weird looking apple that may have a spot on it or whatever. Um, so the main method of treating this and preventing it is prevention. Um, don't plant apples within a few hundred yards of red cedar or juniper. And plant disease-resistant varieties. You'll go a long way to helping your apple trees out. And so next we're going to talk about peaches and nectarines. Peaches, they're not as common in North Carolina as apples, but we do have some late blooming varieties of peaches and nectarines that will will bloom after frost, and because we have a lot later first frost date than a lot of other more southern states. But there are a few peach varieties that will live here. First disease I want to talk about is leaf curl, and it is caused by a fungus. Um, it first appears in the spring as like a reddish area on developing leaves. Then these leaves become like thickened and puckered, and it just curls up, and it really severely distorts them. It looks awful. Also, at the end of these videos, I'm gonna supply some pictures to show you what each disease looks like. Also, you can go to your local extension office, and they usually have a book, or they usually have somebody a lot more knowledgeable than I am that can easily identify your disease and tell you what's going on and some methods that they may prescribe you. Well, to continue on the leaf curl, it's caused by a fungus and usually infects young green twigs and shoots, and then you'll start to notice it even more as the leaf and foliage grows. And it may affect the fruit later in the season. It'll be like a cakey looking scab over the fruit, and it usually cracks. But that can be cause severe, economical losses if you're gonna sell that peach and then it gets that on it. You're just gonna throw it away, most likely. Um, so if the leaf curl builds up and is left uncontrolled, it can eventually cause harm to the tree, and the tree may have to be removed or it may die on its own. You know, trees get their nutrients, what they need from leaves through the sun, and without leaves, they're just gonna die or degrade. So a lot of these diseases affects the leaves, and it may not be quick, like snap, they're dead. It may take a year or two to affect the trees, but once it does, it's hard to reverse that. Um, so the next disease for peaches and nectarines that we're going to talk about is peach scab, and the most notable symptoms of peach scab occur on the fruit. Small greenish circular spots will gradually appear, and they'll enlarge, and they'll deepen in color and then become a black spore producing lesion. Um, and some common ways to prevent this and treat it is use fungicides, and when you spray, if you don't have your trees pruned enough, then that spray is not going to be able to penetrate into the tree and be really effective. So if you prune and improve airflow, and it'll not only improve airflow within your tree and help prevent the disease, but it will also improve your spray penetration. Um, and next, we're going to talk about brown rot. This affects all the fruit trees that we're going to talk about. It affects peaches, apricots, nectarines, plums, cherries, and also apples in the late season. So brown rot, it first affects the blossoms. The blossoms will wilt and turn brown. Um, Blossom infection may also extend into the twigs, causing necrosis. Necrosis is basically just dying tissue. So it'll cause necrosis and eventually girdling. So girdling is when it goes around the twig or whatever, and it essentially just cuts off the nutrients to the upper part of that twig or limb or branch. So then effective blossom will actually serve as like a source for the fungal spores um, to go on and infect the future fruit. So fruit decay usually occurs as the fruit ripens. So everything may look good to start with. You may notice it on the blossoms, but then the fruit starts developing. Then it affects the fruit as it begins to ripen. Um, so this fungus is spread by wind. So it's very hard to prevent transmission if it's spread by wind. But there's some things you can do like pruning. Again, the same with the peach scab. It'll improve airflow and it will improve spray penetration. And also, you can prune off those infected blossoms and twigs, and also remove rotten fruit, and because that's just going to transmit spores, and apply fungicides as well. So next one we're going to talk about is cherries and plums. So one one disease that they have in common is black knot. It can occur in cherries, but it especially occurs in plums. It's a fungal disease that occurs when these trees are grown near like wooded or shaded environments. Um, and it's very common in wild cherry, so it will transmit from the wild cherry to the domesticated cherry and plum. Um, so black knot, it can be reduced by pruning off the knots when they're observed, and it can also be reduced by spraying fungicide, um, just as like the new growth starts in the spring. And also like additional sprays 7 to 10 days apart after that. And there's many different brands and types of sprays that you can use for that. So next part we're going to talk about livestock, goats and sheep. So we're going to talk about 3 of the main most common diseases that goats and sheep get in North Carolina. The first one is foot rot. Foot rot is a bacterial disease that really thrives in humid and warm environments, which is what we have in North Carolina. So foot rot is a contagious disease of the hooves of the goats and sheep that occur often during like rainy periods, or temperatures above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So the first symptoms are limping, holding legs above the ground, reluctance to walk, or grazing on their knees. And when you pick up the hoof, it may appear like the sidewall is ragged or rotten, and usually you can tell first by the odor that it has because it smells like a dead flesh, which essentially it is. It's rotting. Um, so the disease is caused by bacteria that spread through the soil and infected animals. So to prevent this disease, you need to regularly trim the animal's hooves. Um, so you want to trim the walls of the hoof, and you may occasionally have to trim the pad to where it's flat on the ground and there's not a lot of excessive hoof hanging over that'll cause like dirt to get inside of it or manure to get trapped. You can also use foot baths and antibiotics and keep the animals out of muddy, moist environments. So the next disease we have is anemia. Anemia is often caused by parasites such as lice, worms, and ticks. Um, Before I went to college, I used to have about 40 head of goats. They were boar goats, and I had problems with anemia a few times because uh, lice and worms would get on them. They were my common parasite, and they were the common parasite in my herd, and they would cause anemia. And what you want to do is you want to treat the or prevent the external parasites. You can use dewormers and other means of control, like quarantining animals that you just bought, and also like preventing overgrazing. That can go a long way to preventing anemia caused by parasites. Um, so the next disease we're going to talk about is scrapie. Um, Scrapie uh, is not as common as the other 2 diseases, but it could have a huge impact on the goat and sheep industry. Scrapie is fatal. It's degenerative, and it affects the central nervous system. Um, it's kind of similar to mad cow disease, if you know anything about that. But what it does is uh, will slowly start showing, the animals will slowly start showing symptoms. They'll walk strange. They'll rub up against stuff that they don't usually rub up against, um, because they itch, and they're um, due to the disease affecting their brain. Um, Other signs are like change in temperament, um, and they'll lose weight. They'll lose lack of coordination. They'll walk funny. They'll run into stuff they don't mean to. They'll also uh, have like a loss of appetite, and they'll lose weight because of that. They'll also bite their limbs, and they'll just do a lot of strange things that they don't usually do. Um, a common thing is like a common symptom is like high stepping and hopping like a rabbit. Um, again because of lack of coordination. Um, Again, this is a very rare disease, but because it's very fatal, and there's pretty much no cure for it. Um, the USDA and other federal agencies and stuff like that, they require sheep and goat owners to tag their herd, so that they know if a breakout happens, they know where that animal came from, um, and they know, what farms they need to shut off uh, the transporting livestock and stuff like that, and they can easily jump on it and control the outbreak. So usually scrapie, uh, again, it's very rare. It's not something that the normally you would worry about. You wouldn't worry about it as much as disease, parasite caused anemia or foot rot, but it's definitely something to look out for. And you need to know the laws surrounding transporting sheep and goats. So the next animal we're going to talk about is swine. So um, swine that's a very common livestock animal growing in North Carolina. Um, Very common disease for them is coccidiosis. It's a disease characterized by bacteria in suckling and recently weaned pigs. Um, it occurs most often in like confined raised animals, just because they're so close together, and so it causes pretty bad diarrhea and you know um, things like that. Which diarrhea is very common in young piglets, but you can get the animals tested for coccidiosis. Any drug therapy that you use, there's several drugs available to help treat coccidiosis, but it should be used in conjunction with like providing dry bedding and reducing stress that's caused by the birthing or weaning, and also like keeping them away from like inclement weather and away from like overcrowding or unhygienic situations, because this disease is mostly caused by like lack of sanitation or exposure to weather and stuff like that. Um, so next disease we're going to talk about is swine dysentery. Um, Swine dysentery is a severe infectious disease um, caused by that's categorized by like diarrhea and inflammation of the large intestine. So it causes like bleeding along with diarrhea. You may notice like it'll start out gray to yellow feces, and then it will gradually become like darker, and it'll have red. There'll be maybe blood stains on the pigs, um, but the pigs will usually have like a gaunt, unhealthy look to them. They'll be Their tail will twitch, and again, you probably most easily recognize it by like the red stain on their backside due to the hemorrhaging coming from the swine dysentery. So some ways you can treat it and prevent it: use good sanitation practices, um, quarantine infected pigs, and use antibiotics if necessary. So the next disease we're going to talk about is leptospirosis, and this disease can affect pretty much almost any. It can affect a lot of animals. most mammal species. Um, so this will also apply to cattle, sheep, and goats. But leptospirosis is a long, slender-shaped bacteria. It can be transmitted to humans, and it causes infertility and endometriosis, which is like inflammation of the uterus. Um, Most common like symptoms are abortion, blood in urine, fever, depression, and stillbirths. Um, so commonly what people do is they vaccinate their pigs or use antibiotic therapy to treat like uh, diseases that are caused by leptospirosis. So if you have like an infection in the uterus, like due to the leptospirosis, you use antibiotics to help control that. Um, so also you want to keep urine away from animals because it's spread by urine, and use good sanitation practices. So the next disease we're going to talk about is chickens. So there's three diseases that we'll talk about with them. Chickens can also have coccidiosis, and so it's pretty much the same um, treatment as for pigs, but there's medicated feed for chickens that you can use, and it can help prevent or treat some of the symptoms that they have. Um, Also, another disease is avian influenza. That has been a big scare worldwide recently, just because it's so fatal and it's very easily transmitted. Um, so avian influenza, it's an influenza type virus that can infect poultry. Um, it also affects wild flying birds, which is ducks, shorebirds, geese. Um, and we're kind of in the middle of another outbreak that's coming out. Um, but it's very dangerous to your flock and to commercial flocks. But some of the main symptoms are depression, loss of appetite, uh, uh, stop and egg laying, nervous symptoms, nervous signs, swelling and blue discoloration of the combs and wattles. Uh, this is because due to poor blood circulation, also coughing, sneezing, and diarrhea. Sudden death without like any previous signs may also be another symptom. Um, but this is best prevented through biosecurity measures. So maybe have like people that come to your farm wear plastic boots um, that you can throw away. Also quarantine new poultry that you buy until you know that they're healthy. Um, Also avoid traffic coming to your farm as much as possible. Um, and our last disease for poultry that we're going to talk about is Newcastle disease. And Newcastle disease is caused by a virus. This can be transmitted to humans, but it's rare for it to be transmitted. Um, while in severe forms, Newcastle disease can result in sudden death with no obvious symptoms. The most common symptoms are like coughing, sneezing, nasal discharge, like green or watery stool, diarrhea, um, and depression. So that's a pretty common theme among livestock. If the animals act like lazy, they don't want to get up and go eat, they're just kind of sitting there, then usually that's one of the first signs something is wrong and you may need to check on them. Um, so, along with the diarrhea, they may like droop their wings and stuff, and some pretty severe symptoms that that they can have is like muscle tremors, drooping wings, swelling of the eyes or neck, and like twisted neck. The birds may circle. They may have paralysis or sudden death. And Newcastle disease is primarily transmitted through droppings, feces, and secretions from infected birds. So some ways that you can prevent this or treat it is through vaccinating your flock, and also strict biosecurity, like the avian influenza. And so the next livestock group that we're going to talk about is cattle. So we're going to talk about 3 diseases with cattle. One of the most common diseases they can have is shipping fever, also known as bovine respiratory disease. Um, it's one of the most common and costliest diseases to cattle. Uh, what happens is when the cattle are stressed um, through like moving farms or being shipped somewhere, they'll develop this respiratory problem, respiratory disease that affects like the way they gain weight and their overall performance. So the name shipping fever comes from the fact they'll develop a fever when you ship them, or because they're stressed out. Some other signs are like depression, loss of weight, and dull depression looking, um, activity. Um, and the calves that like show this type of behavior, they should be checked for a fever because they'll have a fever with it. And there's many uh, like types of bacteria that will cause this, so it's important to determine which type. Um, because temperatures over 104 degrees Fahrenheit will indicate early signs of the disease. Um, but they may also have like rapid, labored breathing, droopy ears, coughing, diarrhea, staggering, or nasal discharge, or sudden death. So, and antibiotics commonly work to treat these, and they're probably the most effective method. Um, so next we have is blackleg. Um, Blackleg is an infectious disease caused by bacteria. Um, Infections occur when animals ingest the spores while they're grazing. So it doesn't transmit animal to animal, and it comes from the soil. Um, the bacterial spores usually like penetrate the intestine, and then they go to the bloodstream where they go into the muscle, and then the spores will remain dormant. Um, and what happens is an event that causes like low oxygen conditions, so like uh, bruising or like damage to the muscle, the infected tissue will germinate and produce a toxin that causes necrosis and hemorrhage. And the animals that are affected by blackleg will usually be between like 6 to 2 years of age. Um, and then the most common cause would be like death of the infected animal, and or like you may see the um, damage to muscle. The course of the disease is usually between like 12 to 48 hours, um, and then the animals may exhibit like lameness, fever, anorexia, and lethargy during that time period. With this disease, prevention is key. Quarantine infected animals and burn the upper layer of soil to kill the spores, and take the cattle off that section of pasture immediately if you feel like they're being infected with blackleg. Again, it may take a while for them to show symptoms, um, just because of the way the spores work. Um, so the next and final disease that we have is mastitis. So mastitis is pretty common in cattle that are nursing. Um, so it is an infection of the udders and mammary glands. So it'll be like inflammation or it'll cause swelling, redness, and painfulness. Um, it's caused by bacteria and mycoplasms, um, and it's a disease that could progress. It's mild disease that could progress to being severe if left untreated. Um, it may cause reduced milk production and a decline in milk quality. Um, some of the best way to treat this is use antibiotics. Um, that's the most effective way to treat this disease. So next what I'm going to do is we're going to go over some different pictures of the diseases that you see that I've talked about. And hopefully this will help you be able to react quickly if you do see these diseases. And thank you again for watching this video, and I hope that I was able to help you. Again, I wish I could have met with you all in person, and but you know, things happen. So, and I hope everyone is being safe during this time of crisis. And I know if everyone works together, we can get through it. And I just wish you all the best. And I'd like to list some resources that I used for this video. I have them written down here, so I'll look them up very quickly. Um, let's see. The first one is the small flock article that North Carolina University released. Um, it's on their agriculture website. Um, the next one is for swine. It's for the leptospirosis, and it's from the pigsite.com. It's their disease guide. It's from their disease guide. And the next disease is swine dysentery. I got it from um, vet VetMed from Iowa State University. And the next one is coccidiosis swine. I got it from farmhealthonline.com. And let's see. The next one is mastitis cattle. I got it from zoetis.com. And I just looked at what they prescribed, what some of the symptoms they had listed and what they prescribed. Let's see, and shipping fever, I got it from Washington State University, their veterinary medicine extension. Um, let's see, and then blackleg, I got it from North Carolina State University. Their one of their agriculture articles, and scrapie, the information about scrapie, I got from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And let's see, the information about leaf curl and peaches and nectarines I got from University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. And I also got information from there about peach scab and brown rot. And information about apples I got from University of Michigan. And they had a disease database that I used and got information from them. And the information about sweet potato I got from North Carolina State University. And also all of my vegetable disease resources I got from North Carolina State University. And all the ones that I haven't listed I got from them. I have it highlighted here, the ones that were from NC State. And majority of my resources were from NC State, and I'd like to thank them and all the other schools and websites that have put out information out there. It really makes it easy this day and age to quickly diagnose a problem that you may have. Nothing beats a veterinarian or a scientist that knows what they're doing, but it helps that the common person can go online and look it up. And with that, I'd like to again thank everyone for watching this video, and I hope it has helped you. And again, please be safe during this time, and thank you.